All right, then I'll just do the start for today. Thank you all for being here despite the temperatures and other obstacles in the way. I'm Jan Henry. I'm currently a PhD researcher at Porsche from Germany and also affiliated with Ulm University from Germany, which you probably already know. And currently I'm a visiting researcher, or mostly for the last 3 months. I was a visiting researcher at the University of Cambridge. And this week actually is my last week in Cambridge, and I'm very happy that I still got the opportunity to be here and to talk about the research I've been doing over the past, well, 3 years. And I hope I can give you a bit of an overview of what we do at Porsche and why, well, context awareness, which this is mostly about, is so important for mobility. Now, as you probably already guessed, this term, you're going to hear it a lot more often today, as context is a very vague term and it can mean anything. And there is this very cool but also very vague definition of context, which says that context is any information that can be used to characterize the situation of an entity, with an entity being a person, place, or object that is considered relevant to the interaction. In other words, this means anything is relevant. So how do we identify what is relevant? And in many context-aware systems, this is not a trivial question. So to tackle this, I often follow a research through design approach. And research through design, you probably already heard that before. I can give you a quick overview of the model from the original paper. Here, HCI researchers deliver research artifacts that provide not only knowledge, but also working examples for practitioners, such as industrial designers, which obviously is of interest for me as an industrial researcher as well. So here the interaction designer is in the center, and they integrate the true knowledge from behavioral scientists, so models and theories, with the how knowledge from engineers, so these are the technical opportunities, which is grounded in real knowledge from anthropologists through user studies and field data. And all of this is integrated into a research artifact or multiple research artifacts, which then practitioners can utilize and adapt for their own individual design problem. So this is a very useful approach to probe novel and under-constrained interaction spaces through artifacts. And regarding context, we can utilize this to probe a subset of contextual cues or variables and their impact on the user experience. And that's pretty much what I did over the past 2.5 to 3 years. Across several experiments, I varied the subset of contextual variables to find out how much context is enough or how much context is necessary. And yeah, this is mainly what motivated my recent research. And to give you an example of how this could look like, I today brought 2 projects that we recently published. The first one being actually my very first research project when I joined Porsche in 2023. We published this at the WIST conference in 2024. And it's all started out when I started reading into different types of context in cars and mobility and how they are used. And I realized there's so much unused information in mobility settings. There must be better ways to integrate this into the driving experience. So one of the most frequent activities in cars is listening to audiobooks or podcasts. So I thought maybe we can somehow improve this very static activity, especially now that LLMs are really, really good at generating text-based content. There's a theory that grounds this project, which is called the dual coding theory, which you probably also heard before, that states that we are better at understanding and memorizing things when we can associate an auditive and a visual association of that object. So we leverage this theory into a context-aware storytelling system. And before I go into details, we can have a quick look at an example. And I really hope this works because I need sound for this.
Under the watchful gaze.
It doesn't. Give me a second. Or does it work online? I think it should work online. Can I access the speaker somehow via HDMI? Yeah, I think hopefully this works.
Under the watchful gaze of Pallas Athena, the goddess of wisdom.
I can't get sound. Anyways, you just have to imagine what's going on here. We can see a car driving through the old city of Vienna, and we can see the Parliament building over there. And there's a story or an audiobook running in the background where the fictitious characters of that audiobook arrive at that exact location. at the time the car is driving towards the Parliament building. So what we do, we mix the fictitious audiobook with the real world in real time. And how did we do this? Wait, we're back. So based on the user's route and the points of interest along that route, we create a story along that route that incorporates these real-world locations into that fictitious story. And using LLMs, we first generate an estimate story outline, just based on bullet points that follows that route along the points of interest. And then based on this backbone, we generate an entire story. And here we already consider the estimated times of arrival. So let's say the first point of interest is 1 minute or 2 minutes away, then we know roughly the first chapter should be 1 or 2 minutes long. So in the beginning, I have this basically perfectly generated story that follows these timings. But in the real world, this won't work for long because there's traffic jams, there's red lights, there's pedestrians crossing the street, you name it. So these timings are gonna vary very soon. So we need to adjust for this in real time. And we do this by continuously recalculating our estimated time of arrival at the next point of interest. And we also calculate something that's called the estimated time of mention. So we basically calculate when that place, that real-world location, is mentioned for the first time in the fictitious story. And this should align, right? Because I should hear the name of the building as soon as I see it. As soon as there's a difference between them, we simply cut sentences short from the story. Or if the difference is in the other direction, we can just extend the story using LLMs to generate certain chapters along the way. So now we can, now that we regenerated the remaining chapter, we have this fully synchronized story experience where the real-world locations are synchronized with the fictitious story. And these edits are conducted continuously along the story and during this perfect alignment. Now we did do a user study on that in several cities. Mostly the most important one was the comparative user study in Ulm, as you can see behind me. It was a comparative user study against a baseline system, just an ordinary audiobook, which also was generated to maintain comparison, but no adjustments, no real-world locations in the baseline. And we had a fixed route of 25 minutes. You can see it here. Actually, it starts at the university, at our very offices, and goes just once across town to the other side. And then it goes back again where we have the baseline condition, or vice versa. And after every condition, we measured user experience, narrative engagement, and geographic perception. Now about that geographic perception, we asked participants to freely recall any places, any locations they heard throughout the story. And as you can see, much more real-world locations were recalled from memory than the fictitious places. So not only does the inclusion of context improve the immersion, but it also makes the experience much more memorable and easier to understand, which kind of was the point of what we did in the beginning with the dual coding theory. Now, we also had a significantly improved overall user experience, which was just measured through the user experience questionnaire. And we also had improved narrative engagement, particularly one subscale, which is called the attentional focus subscale. And this also covers with some qualitative feedback we queried in the end, where users said that they were brought back into the story when their thoughts drifted away, and we could confirm this. So to summarize, in story-driven, we put in environmental context into our storytelling system, mostly real-world locations, also time of day, weather, and season, just to match the stories. And we had a positive impact on user experience, narrative engagement, and memorization. Now, this was a very fixed and predetermined set of context variables. So what if we wanted to adjust more than just an audiobook or just that one activity? And this is what we did in our second project, and the second project of today, in the project called Gen X. What if we adjusted every output of a device that we have available, not only the speakers or the audiobook, but in modern environments, we have many more devices, especially in, you name it, smart home environments. We have incredibly rich output possibilities. So there's screens, there's speakers, sometimes there's even ambilight. But still, in these smart homes, few use cases usually require a lot of manual explicit interaction. Even though they are supposed to be smart, we still need to set them up manually and sort of control them individually. So we can have a look at an example. Again, sound would have been nice for that. You just have to believe me when I tell you it's working. Let's say the user comes home from work and wants to read a book. Now, the user manually has to set the blinds. They have to adjust the ceiling lights, turn on the reading light, maybe turn on some ambient music, you name it. So that's already 4 separate interactions. And as soon as the user activity changes, let's say they put the book away, or maybe they even swap the book, everything needs to be readjusted again, which is less than ideal. And instead, this could happen fully automated.
He sat down on the bank at the side.
I'm going to skip this example. Maybe the people online can hear it, but what we can see here is we have our static smart home environment with green ambilight and some forest scenery on the screen. And when the user changes the contents of their book, because they're later in the book and the context basically changes, the smart home environment also changes automatically.
And the special effects.
Now, this is a very static scenario. So how do we approach this so it works in more than just this reading scenario? And we tackled this with a perception-driven approach. So we have an LLM-based multi-agent architecture with 3 main modules. We capture the user perception from the user's point of view, and I'm going to give an example on that later. That makes it a bit clearer. But based on that user perspective, we extract the current scene to derive user context, and we feed that into our generative interface control. And that generative interface control interprets the scene description and translates it into a suitable user experience. So through LLM-based reasoning, we translate contextual variables and basically the setting we have into a suitable orchestration around the user. So now, based on available devices, say it's our smart home, and we have several devices available, we now auto-generate Python scripts that contain instruction for these devices. So then we can execute these scripts and send instructions to each of the devices. And this is what happens in the last module, that experience pipeline. That pipeline executes these instructions either directly, for example, as we saw before, changing the ambilight. It's a simple RGB command, maybe some patterns, but all of this can be generated on demand. For the screen, it's a bit more complicated, where we have indirect commands where we first need to generate suitable media. So we query online cloud-based services to generate images, for example, DALL-E, and then we send this media that has been generated to the devices that are available. So if we look at the book reading example, the user is obviously reading a book. And we can see this because the user is wearing a wearable camera device. In our case, it was a HoloLens. Yeah, we can see that down below. So we can capture what the user is looking at and also what contents are in the book because, well, we have vision language models and they are quite capable of doing that. And when we analyze this image, we can then detect all sorts of settings. So we can see the contents, we can see the book, it's inside, it's a dark room. We can have the book contents, and we can also have like a more descriptive, more qualitative setting to capture the atmosphere or the vibe, if you want so. And based on this and the list of available devices, we can then generate our scripts, as I said before, and send instructions via web requests, via API calls to the individual devices. In that case, it would be, for example, the TV screen we saw before, and we can see over there. We have our reading light, our ambilight, and the HoloLens obviously also is capable of displaying some things. And we demonstrated this system in several environments to gain insights into practical limitations, because this is a research through design approach. So we decided to, before we do a large-scale user study, to just try it out ourselves, basically. And we tested it in several settings. We can see some household chores, some mobility scenarios, even outdoor scenarios. And we stumbled upon a few limitations. The more obvious ones, the technical one, mostly from the HoloLens device, that AR brightness is unsuitable for outdoor scenarios. And there's also some limitations with the moving platform mode of the HoloLens. More importantly, we discovered that it's not very useful for task-oriented activities. So, for example, in these household chores, the system was usually rather distractive than supportive. So after that demonstration phase, we decided to focus on entertainment scenarios, such as reading a book. So that's why we came back to that setting again when we did our exploratory user study. We conducted it in that reading scenario you just saw with 60 participants in said smart home environment. And we did this to get feedback on activity support, so how well are users supported in their activity. We wanted to match user expectations with the outcome of the system to see if it somehow mirrors the mental model that the users have of such AI-based systems. But most importantly, we wanted to measure the impact of this very implicit interaction on people's understanding of the experience. Because everything happens automated, right? So people have no way of understanding why a certain decision was made. And we wanted to see how that impacts the overall experience. So we did have some quantitative results by simply doing some before-after comparisons, and we found a reduced mind wandering and reduced arousal. We also queried the overall user experience again, and we did manage to get comparatively good ratings on the user experience, but there is a subscale in the user experience questionnaire, which is called confusing clear. And this had relatively bad ratings. So we decided to check the qualitative feedback to see why that was the case. And we had some of our quantitative measures confirmed. Overall, it was perceived quite positive. And similar to the project before, it also had diving back into the story, but it was perceived as cumbersome at times. And most importantly, there we have our answer. The 3D generated holograms for the HoloLens lacked detail and were more distracting and confusing. So to summarize the whole experiment and that whole design process, our input was very open-ended. We had an open-ended set of context that we fused into our system, mostly user context and environment context, but it was based on camera devices, so it's quite open to the model that interprets the input. And we had an impact on user experience, mind wandering, but also on the user confusion. So this dynamically derived context was not necessarily a bad thing. On the contrary, it was perceived quite positively as long as it worked. But as soon as it stopped working, or as one component mostly stops working, in that case, the AR holograms, the entire user experience was confusing and suffered from that one component. So our main finding from this being that intelligibility is important when the system does not 100% work as intended. And obviously, there were many more findings on that, but since I'm hitting the 20-minute mark, I'm going to leave it where we are. That was a brief overview on 2 of my recent publications, and we can go back to questions later. I think I'll hand it over to Zhuoyue first. Thanks. Oh, yeah.
So first, share the screen. Okay. Okay. So so my part is called Beyond the Here and Now, and I'm Zhuoyue. I'm a final year PhD candidate from the University of Cambridge. And today I will present 2 published work of my PhD that point toward a future beyond the here and now. So my PhD looks like this. It's an expansion of awareness from our immediate surroundings to the surfaces and boundaries and to the broader world, which is also my ongoing work. And I guess my collaboration with young Henry also falls into this number 3. So today I will present the number 1 and 2. So let's start with the first one. So this work is co-authored with my supervisor, Paola Christensen, and it's published as a full paper at CHI this year. It's called Objectures, where the everyday object interaction meets media gesture interaction for expressive possibilities. So prior work has recognized that everyday objects can be utilized for their tangibility and haptics. For example, you can rotate a cup to manipulate a virtual car model. But such interaction is also shaped by constraints, like if there's no such cup, then in your surroundings, then this functionality can be lost. And media gesture, on the other hand, is something humans have been capable of doing for a long time. In the digital experiences, it's convenient and it removes the need to carry controllers. For example, you can use media gestures to easily create animations in VR. However, there are also constraints such as the lack of haptic feedback, which can lead to fatigue and decreased accuracy. And as these two provide complementary characteristics, integrating them can be useful. And prior work has done exactly this, but often with very specific use cases or technologies. For example, you can draw with a pen in one hand and perform media gestures on the other to switch mode. But there's limited guidance that generalizes across like different objects and gestures. Therefore, we present Objectures, 5 interaction types spanning various media gesture and everyday objects interactions. In the paper, we provided details on how we come up with them. It's more of a reflective engagement with examples rather than a complete survey. So here, I'm just going to highlight a little bit for you. So we first noticed that many existing object-based interaction relies on sliding. For example, sliding on a book edge to control the fence speed, or using the table edge as a slider. Similarly, there are many rotational everyday object interaction, like use a plate as a steering wheel, or rotate a cup as a dial to control the brightness of the light. And prior work noticed this as well and was like, hey, these are great, but sometimes it might be quicker if I just do a pinch instead of having to, find an object to tap on. So we went on and identified more equivalents. So for triggering, you can tap on the table bell for flipping a coin, but you can also do gestures like pinching, snapping fingers, or giving a thumbs up. And we call these binary, as in triggering something, you often have this binary state changes. So we went on and identified more such equivalents. So for those 2 common interactions we mentioned before, for sliding, you can do that in midair. And for the rotational, you can do that in midair as well. And we call these linear rotational. We then noticed that many interactions involve squeezing, such as sculpting using this sponge, or squeezing a handle to trigger something, especially this one, because you can also just press a button to do that. But squeezing itself has this like distinct experiential qualities. So therefore, we characterize them as nonlinear, as they often involve nonlinear forces. And many object-based interaction involves unconstrained spatial movements, such as moving a small container as a flashlight, or using spray bottle as a drill. And you can do that in midair as well, and we call these free interaction. So far, our focus has been on single hand, like unimanual interaction, but many interactions use both hands. For example, as shown before, you can have one hand performing like we call EOI, everyday object interaction with the pen, while the other hand performing MAI, which is a media gesture interaction. Or both hand performing EOI, such as playing a keyboard with one hand and drawing with the other, or both hand performing MAI. Okay, I think my computer's stuck. Okay, there we go. And by constructing these 5 types of interaction unimanually and bimanually, we can form a design space with 5 regions. So that gives us 85 interactions in total. So here are the 5 interaction types with objects, and that forms the first region of the design space. Similarly, we perform the 5 types without object in midair. It gives you 5 MAIs, that's the second region. And performing EOI with one hand and MAI with the other, we have 5 times 5, that's 25 bimanual interaction, and that's the third region. Similarly, with EOIs on both hands, we have another 25, and with media gestures on both hands, we have the final 25. So evaluating all 85 of them is a bit outside the scope of this paper. So we selected several. So we first want to see if objectors can effectively support basic 3D tasks like rotation and scaling. For rotation, the user performs a binary interaction to select the cube on one hand, while a rotational interaction with a coffee cup on the other hand to rotate it to match the target size, a target angle. For scaling, the user again uses a binary interaction to select the cube, while a linear interaction performed by sliding along this book edge scales it to match the target size. And the same manipulation can also be done using media gestures alone for rotation and for scaling. So we compare objectors both with and without objects to the headset's default freehand manipulation on both the near and far targets. So in the study with 12 participants, we found that objectors showed comparable performance to the baseline in task completion time, workload, and preference. To further understand the user experience, we conducted case studies on 3 applications with the same 12 participants. So Draw is a drawing app where one hand uses free interaction as a brush, while the other hand's rotational movement controls the brush size. And Sound is a musical instrument app with one hand using linear interaction to control the pitch, while the other hand performing nonlinear interaction with this stuffed animal to control the dynamics, allowing you to play different melodies. And you can find the video with sound in the supplementary material of the paper. And the Shadow is an architectural app that uses mid-air free interaction to represent the sun and object-based free interaction for the building placement. So you can explore how sunlight and building arrangements impact the shadows. So participants found these engaging, expressive, and showed interest in everyday use. We further illustrated 30 examples to show how objectors can enrich everyday interactions. For instance, with linear interaction on one hand and binary on the other, you can play a spaceship shooting game. So here I'm using a table bell and the edge of a cabinet in an empty office, but you can play it anywhere you want. And with free interaction on one hand and binary on the other, you can grow and care for digital plants by watering them. So here I use a coleus, but you could grow exotic or even alien plants in any empty pot. So finally, we discuss how objectors provide synergistic benefits and how future design can make use of the flexibility between these 2 modalities, and how using objects provide anchoring for psychological trust and proprioceptive return. So basically, like just having something physically there makes you more aware of the situation. And also, as some participants said, the duck was a bit too cute to squeeze on. So we also discussed the importance of the semantic congruence. And we acknowledge the limitation of sample size, only 12 people. And in the future, we can do interviews or workshop with designers to understand how the design space support ideation and what other dimensions can be added to it. So ultimately, we hope the work can serve as a building block for interaction design that deepen the connection between a human, a physical world, and digital experiences. So that's the first one. Now let's expand our awareness to the boundaries and surfaces. So this work was published at CHI as well. It's called Unbounded, a research through design inquiry into object boundary interaction. So let's start with an object and a boundary. So boundaries are everywhere. Like we have these walls, we have the ceilings, we have the floors, and they're typically understood as constraints to limit your movement. And prior work has challenged this by letting objects to pass through boundaries. For example, using actuated portals that allow these little robots to pass through this wall. So basically, in the physical world, if you need to go through a boundary, you usually would need an opening. And I was interested in how this could be reimagined in mixed reality, where there are no physical laws and you can do what you cannot in the real world, such as seeing something passing directly through a boundary. And we can articulate this in a three-part relationship among the object, boundary, and human. And through 4 different iterations, we gave them many attributes. We probably won't have time to go through them, but I will show you what you can do with this design space, because using it, especially these symbols, you can describe and construct new interactions. For instance, the one that we seen before can be illustrated like this. So this little robot is a physical object because it physically exists, and represented by this solid circle crossing this white wall, which is a physical and opaque boundary because you cannot see the other side, represented by this hatched double line. So hatching represent the opaque and the double line represent physical. Since it's mechanically actuated, the star symbol represent transformative, and the eye symbol represent the viewer's position. And the dashed hand symbol represent indirect manipulation as it's pre-programmed. So this illustration basically captures the specific object boundary interaction in this scene. And we can do the same for many prior examples as well. And not only can the design space describe interaction, you can also use it to construct one. And we demonstrate that through a video of 2 scenarios. So the first one is called productivity. It's about how this concept can enrich the work-related setting. And the second one is about how it can support artistic experience. So I'm going to play this video, but you will see those little illustrations in the corner, like you've seen before, but you don't need to pay much attention to it. You can just pay attention to the main interaction. I'm not sure if the sound is going to work. Maybe it's not going to work, but yeah, so this is the first scenario. And you have a expired bank statement on the table. And so you can pick it up and shred it through this bookshelf. And there you have an important kite paper. You don't want to shred this, of course. And you pick up a marker and want to write something, but it doesn't work. So you drop it into the trash can on the tabletop. And this marker works. And you can use this wall as a whiteboard. And finally, you can read the paper peacefully. But there's sound, but there's noise from the outside. So you pull up this acoustic partition from seam along this windowsill. And in the video you will hear the sound hitting this. This is the second scenario. It's in the art gallery. And we have this artwork that you can interact with. Yes. So in the paper, we, first of all, in the supplementary material, we have the video, so you can hear the sound if you want. But in the paper, we also reflect on the rationale behind the design of each example. For instance, in the traditional gallery experience, usually viewers are mostly passive. So you can probably see a short wall label to read about the work, and that's it. And maybe there's also this do not touch rule. So here we ask, what if viewers are active participants? What if you can interact or even co-create the artwork? And besides those reflections, we also provide implementations such as these 6 material effects in Unity. For instance, this cloak of invisibility is just like in the Harry Potter, where everything put inside becomes invisible. And now, using the design space and these examples as design probes, we conducted one-on-one feedback sessions with 6 experts to gather critique, reflection, and insights. So they came from both academia and industry, with expertise in MR interaction design, media art, tangible and haptic interaction, and theory. And our thematic analysis identified 7 findings that expand the scope of the space and review new ways it can be used and suggest directions for future interaction design. Using these findings, we refine the design space. For example, we now consider different formations of the boundary. Of course, it can be given, but letting users define where and what they want to put up can provide more agency, and boundaries can be emergent. For example, one expert mentioned those lane markings on the road, like those double solid yellow lines. They're just 2D, and you can drive across if you want, but they create these 3D boundaries in your mind that you don't want to cross it. And also each element now has 3 layers of information. So there's a name, and there's example affordances, and there's example design. So this design space we see it as an ongoing dialogue. So it can be updated with elements that you care about. And besides, in the paper, we also discuss that many prior work in MR has touched upon the idea of like seamlessness by creating illusions. So you might have like a physical chair vanish, or replace a phone with a pile of book. However, we could also benefit from a bit more seamfulness, where there's no illusion. So this white part is a physical reality, and the black part is a digital reality. So by removing a chair or phone, we essentially remove part of the physical reality, whereas seamful MR preserve the whole thing. And we argue that it could provide more grounding to the experience as it matches our expectations of perceptual causality and object permanence. And we also discuss how modern art, such as this act of unfolding of surrealism, can inspire future object boundary interaction. So these 2 projects build on one another and gradually expanding our awareness outwards to the 3rd project I'm working on, where I'm using autoethnography to explore our relationship with the broader world through the idea of entanglement. And I'd happy to share more if there's an opportunity in the future. And with that, thank you for listening, and I think we are happy to take questions. Yeah.
So, thank you very much. Very nice talks. Are there already questions also online? As mentioned, just put them in the chat and I will read them out for you. So, who has the first question? So my first question would be about the seam-full MR. For me, this sounded much like traditional AR. Where do you see the distinction between that, where I would just overlay reality while still keeping reality? Is there a distinction? I'm just wondering.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, because so there was a paper about what is mixed reality. Like the whole paper is just asking that question. And I think in this paper, we use the definition of mixed reality as a strong AR. So as a stronger version of augmented reality, where the digital content has deeper interaction with the physical one. Well, overlay is one of them, but maybe you can see those in those examples. For example, the paintings, the physical and the digital painting, they're treated as like the same thing, they're extending. So we see this as maybe a deeper connection between the physical and the digital. And yeah, hope to answer your question.
Thank you. Are there other questions?
Along those lines, actually, I have 2 questions. Question 1 is like, what slideshow software do you use? Because that was pretty nice. And the second question is like, what do you think is the bottleneck? like all of what you showed is pretty nice, but we still struggle to see it in industry. So I'm just curious from your perspective of what is the bottleneck, or what is the part that's missing for us to start seeing that in my day-to-day life. Yeah.
I see. Yeah. So for the first question, what software? So I was just using Unity. Unity. Yeah. You mean
For the slideshow?
oh, for the slides? Oh, for the slides. Slides is Apple Keynote. Yeah, Apple Keynote. They have a function called Magic Move that you can connect different slides. Yeah. And the second question, industry. So I think when I was doing this, so now I think things have improved a little bit, but when I was doing this, a big bottleneck would be like the tracking. Because for example, for the painting thing, I have to manually align them because when I was doing this, there was no object tracking allowed by the Meta to the developer. Now they have some object tracking, but it's not super accurate. So I felt to reach that level, especially for the first project with objects, you need very accurate tracking. And I think that will be the bottleneck, at least from this project's point of view. Yeah.
I have one more question for both of you. What I found cool is that you thought about new ideas of interacting, right? And kind of seeing the whole world as a potential to interact. This has benefits and it looks pretty cool. But of course, if everything is an interaction, how would we even know what's all possible, right? So where do you see this going? Because by using anything as a shredder, I might not want to do that actually, but use this table and suddenly a shredder, right? So how like the affordances theory, let's say, has its merits, right? I know what's going to happen. If I don't, I have to figure it out, and I might do something that's wrong. I'm just wondering where this is, and this is in the use case of the home, where things can change, and here also in your use case. So what are your thoughts on this?
Should I grab the microphone, or is it fine like this?
No, grab the microphone, please.
So yeah, as you said, until now it's mostly been about affordances, but through mixed reality we can redesign the affordances accordingly, or especially with the smart home. I think it's going to be mostly about learning systems, learning what preferences I have, or because it's very subjective. Everybody has different associations to different real world objects. So if I shred an object digitally, it's not gone forever, right? I can still have an undo option. And by that, I think learning systems are the way the interactive system can learn what surfaces for me, for example, are a shredder or what aren't. And since this is very subjective, I think this can develop over time.
So should the system learn, or do we have to make it easier for the person to learn?
I guess it's always both, right? It's always an adaptive process. I think because people still have the traditional affordances in their mind with some surfaces, many people are going to have similar patterns, and then it's just a matter of finding the rest of that interactive space that might be individual or subjective for the system to learn. So I think it's both.
Me, I think when I was interviewing those experts, some of them raised similar questions, and I guess like if turning everything into interaction, it will indeed be a lot like too complicated. I guess the vision behind this is like maybe we want to use some of them for interaction, because right now I feel like there's a trend of moving things towards fully digital or fully like detached from our physical world. And I'm just thinking maybe we still need to have some groundings there, and having interaction with like the physical boundaries or objects is sort of like my interpretation of having this grounding. But I guess maybe there are other better way to have that grounding. But if like having grounding everywhere, that's indeed going to be an issue. So we might want to have a balance. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So, and online questions fit nicely into this. You guys have very interesting new ideas, and you also built these with a whole new angle, methodology or design space. Can you tell us a bit more about the ideation process and this research techniques. So how do you come up with these questions? So this was by Yihan Dong.
Okay. Research process. So I think for me, these two projects, so the second one followed the first one, and the first one, I think I was just thinking about, because I saw many Kai papers that year 23 when I was start doing this about just using objects like just some cup or some stuff on your table. But and also at the same time in the group, we have some guys doing gestures. So I think it was just a combination at that point. I was thinking, yeah, these two modalities have some things that can be complementary. And that becomes the initial idea of combining these two. And that gradually leads to the expansion of a design space. And also, I guess it's just personally, I started with the engineering mindset, but I gradually leaning towards more like a design and research through design mindset. So in the first project, there's still like traditional comparison of two techniques and lots of emphasis on the statistics, on the performance. But then to the second project is more about what kind of vision, what kind of design we can have. And to the third one I'm working on is even more like a design work. So it's both like a inspiration from what I see and also personal shift in the research focus.
Yeah, maybe to add two minor things to that. I think it always starts out with one idea of one very specific use case that might be cool to see or might be interesting to look at. And then from that, we just try to abstract and get more use cases and eventually gather that design space, like in all of that research through design process. But I mean, it's a very long process. We're still working with, technically, we're still in the ideation phase of our project, and I've been here for 3 months. So this always takes a while. So yeah, I think it's narrow to broad.
Yeah. Cool. I have two more on. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
Then two more online questions. So we started late, so we have 10 more minutes, I would say. We also have the room for a whole another hour.
Thank you so much. I thought those were two really good talks. I'm kind of, it's like a half-baked question, so I might stumble over it a little bit. You talk a lot about grounding when you were talking about the first and second projects. What I think is really interesting is that the physicality of objects itself provides meaning. Like they take up space and they get old, and we have to deal with that. So as we potentially move into a different way of interacting with our environment, how does like the relationship between feeling grounded, but then also losing, I don't know what the term is, maybe like the physicality, the like thermodynamics, the friction of interaction change?
Like friction comes from objects being.
I think I more meant like if none of these objects take up, for example, space, then how do we give them meaning? How do we know when we need to clean things out or like change?
So you mean like those digital objects? Like
yes.
Yeah. I see. Yeah, I guess that's exactly the things I'm sort of try to like oppose. Like I try to always let the digital content have some connection with the physical one, because like you said, like object can get old and they carry some, they occupy the space, they also carry the meaning, which also there's a small reflection in the first project, like that duck. So when I do that project, I just thought it's a object to be squeezed. But for different participants, they have different feelings. Like some people feel it's cute, some people feel like maybe reminds them of something they had before. So they're not just a tool; they have meaning. So I guess I always try to combine them. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
I'll read that reflection. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
So two more online questions, but if you guys have more questions, right, please do ask. By Mingyan Ren, for the Unbounded project, very cool and fancy. I'm curious, what's the real world usage scenario?
Yeah, I think for that one, I guess because I guess the second scenario for the art gallery we might see that like it might make more sense in the real world. But the first one, productivity, I think also some experts from the interview they mentioned it's probably not that useful. But I guess the second one, because you can imagine all those artwork, if it becomes something you can interact with, that'll be very interesting. And I guess yeah, in gallery and museum setting, it might be useful. But back to your question, I think a lot of the technology need to reach that point because that demo is like I mentioned, it's not like the system automatically recognizes picture and generate that artwork. A lot of things need to be predefined. So to reach that, we need to solve those bottleneck, and maybe in the museum art gallery, it will be helpful. Yeah.
Thanks. And then last question. If everyday physical objects can become essentially controllers, rotating the coffee cup, etc., could there be a benefit to designing a new type of controller that would allow for a broader range of interactions? Something that is rotatable, squeezable, slidable, etc. That's by Anya Emmons.
So question is about would there be this kind of object like one?
So instead of, I think the idea is instead of having everyday objects be the controller, create a controller that enables all of this, or maybe change your cup to also be squeezable, for example. Right?
Oh, I see. I guess for that, yeah, I think at some point in that project, I did thought about why not just create one controller that can maybe do a lot of them. But then I guess maybe back to the point that you mentioned, some objects, I probably don't want to modify them. For example, I have a mug. Maybe the mug, I bought it in a special place and that carry memory. Maybe I just want to leave it as a mug. I don't want to augment it or modify it. So I felt I end up utilizing those objects because I kind of just felt some objects, they will bring special meaning to people and people might not want to just modify it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Is it Jan Henry? Yeah, I just had a question for you. I think I'll apply the question to your second paper that you showed, which was it was like an indoor scenario with using smart controls. So if you are able to kind of manipulate the user's environment while they're consuming content, say a book, as you showed, like what does that do for like their continuity? So the example I give you is like certain books that we read as children are adapted and they become a movie or a play or whatever, and that actually changes our perception of what they are. So I just kind of wonder, like, have you thought about that kind of continuity aspect of experiencing the media in an augmented sense, and then maybe that either going away or not replaying the same way in the future?
Definitely an interesting aspect. I think the design was mostly intended to support and to, well, in a subtle way, the current experience. So by generating ambient audio or having some images around to emphasize the already existing experience, not to create a new one out of this. I think this would add another dimension to this. I'm not sure if it would be possible to do that. Assumingly in the future it would be. But I think the idea of that project would be more to be supportive, not to create new ways of consuming the media. If we did that, of course, then we run into several issues, I think. Not only replayability, but also, as you mentioned, if it's made for children, and we have more than one person in the room, it's already going to be difficult in terms of scalability, right? Do we emphasize it for the children or do we emphasize it for the adults? And I think there's more to that in terms of scalability. Definitely an interesting aspect. We didn't examine it so far in our project. I feel like it goes a bit more in that direction that we're currently heading in, but yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
I have a follow-up question. Do we have time for it? Yeah. I think debate is for both of you. Just want to hear your thoughts. The question has two parts. One of them is about multiplayer and the other one is about personalization. So I'll go with personalization first. So if we are going towards a world where every object could be an interaction, then I can imagine there are literally infinite permutations of interactions that you can have. And that could be a world which you mentioned, where maybe a dog, some people might squeeze it, but other people might slide it. So there could potentially be a world in which we have systems that work differently for each person, and we have interactions that are just custom to me and only work for me because that's just how I interact with the world. But maybe for Carson will be the exact same result, but completely different interaction. So I'm just curious to see like how you think about that, if you think that's a possibility, if you think there are limitations or not. And also for multiplayer, especially if you're interacting in a room and you have two people doing different activities and the changing in the room clash with each other, like how do you think about that? Because I could see that happening in a house in my family where 6 people, so I could definitely see siblings fighting over each other and doing those. Yeah, just curious.
Yeah, a really good question, and I think that it's literally the question we asked ourselves when we started the collaborative project, which we haven't talked about yet because it's still in the works, but we're currently trying to figure out how to transition between different states of these mixed reality scenarios. So for example, if I transition from an individual experience to a multi-user experience, how do I accommodate that through different strategies like layering or locking or like blending and this stuff. So I think it always highly depends on the use case. As you mentioned, siblings fighting, sometimes it might be an intended effect to work together on one object and you don't want to separate it, right? So this is highly context dependent, and probably not that easy to answer in a single sentence, but it's pretty much what we're currently working on. So maybe you'll hear about it in about half a year.
All right, let's thank the speakers together.